Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sophie Hackett, the AGO's Curator of Photography, and I'm very pleased to be here this afternoon with Hank Willis Thomas. Before we get started, I just do want to acknowledge that the AGO operates on the land that is the territory of the Anishinaabe Mississauga Nation, and also the territory of the Wendat and Haudenosaunee. The Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant is an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Anishinaabe Three Fires Confederacy to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Toronto is also governed by a treaty between the federal government of Canada and the Mississaugas of the Credit Anishinaabe Nation. Toronto has always been a trading center for First Nations. And now I want to just say a few words about our guest today. Hank Willis Thomas is a conceptual artist working primarily with themes related to perspective, identity, commodity, media, and popular culture. His work often incorporates widely recognizable icons, many from well-known advertising or branding campaigns, to explore their ability to reinforce generalizations developed around race, gender, and identity. Hank is a trained photographer, and over the past several years, his practice has evolved further to incorporate a variety of media including mirrors, retroreflective vinyl, as well as three-dimensional sculptural materials like bronze. Influenced by social history and the hard-fought perennial battle for equality in all areas of his work, Thomas has also undertaken collaborative projects, including Question Brigade, Black Males in Search of the Truth Booth, and For Freedoms, the first artist-run initiative for art and civic engagement, which was awarded the ICP Infinity Award for New Media and Online Platform in 2017. Thomas is a recipient of the Gordon Parks Foundation Fellowship in 2019, the Guggenheim Fellowship 2018, and of course the AMIA AGO Photography Prize in 2017, among many other honors. And that's how I know many people here in Toronto, those listening from Toronto, know your work. He is joining us from Brooklyn, where he lives and works. Thank you for being here, Hank.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thanks so much. 2 more points of housekeeping. Just please use the webinar Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions. And I would be remiss if I didn't also thank the TD Ready Commitment, who is our lead sponsor of talks and performances. Thank you for generously supporting this talk. And if we could have the slides, please. So you've been busy the last few days, the last few years.
So good to see you.
I know, right?
It's been so long, and I mean, God knows when it will be again. But it was so great to work with you on the AGO Photography Prize and to be in Toronto, and so it's good to be back in that feeling at least.
Yeah, may it be sooner than later when we can cross this border between us. So we're here in part to talk about your work, but we're also going to take the chance to talk about the work of a South African photographer, Ernest Cole, who made a powerful and enduring document of apartheid subjugation in the 1960s, work that he published as a book called House of Bondage in 1967. And some of these works are on view in the AGO's galleries, which hopefully will open to the public soon for you all to see. But I wanted to find out first, before we dive into that, do you remember first learning about apartheid in South Africa, and how and when?
Well, I mean, I recall when I was at least 9 or 10, going to protest with my mother in Philadelphia and in New York to end apartheid and to encourage American companies like Coca-Cola to divest. Of course, I didn't know what divest was, but I didn't also know that Coca-Cola could be part of anything bad. And so that was really the kind of main kind of strong memories. And then, of course, there was a movie called Cry Freedom that came out that featured Denzel Washington and Stephen Biko, and that was around 1988. So I became more and more aware of that. So around 12, and then in 90, Nelson Mandela was released, and he came to the U.S. soon after, to the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, where my mother worked. So by then, I think I was relatively aware, and the profile of Winnie Mandela and Bishop Desmond Tutu had kind of risen on the national scale by then.
What did that, what impression did that make on you? Or is it, I mean, it sounds like there are personalities and some pop cultural, like the film you mentioned in Denzel Washington, but are there other sort of still images that stayed with you from that time?
Well, honestly, the thing that I took away the most from that those memories was how horrible and how much disdain I had for the white South African accent, which was fascinating as I became friends with white South Africans after apartheid, and kind of rewiring this kind of prejudice, or prejudice that was in my own kind of consciousness from a young person about who were bad people and who were good people, and trying to kind of reconcile the kind of ways in which we and many people participate in state violence through our willingness to stay quiet and to go along with things that we don't necessarily agree with, but that benefit us greatly. And I say that because I'm sure for many people, the American accent has, and our accent, your similar accent, have a similar colonial kind of reference. So I know that's weird, but I'm like, it wasn't the photographs, it was the voice.
Yeah, that's interesting, because if I think, I mean, we grew up sort of roughly through the same decades, and when I think about it, I think I don't remember first learning about it, but I remember always being aware of the sort of anti-apartheid movement. I grew up kind of in rural areas, so I didn't have the same kind of urban experience of going to a protest, for instance. But there are no images that come to mind in particular, besides sort of news, thinking about the news and it being on the news and it's sort of being a kind of a low buzz in the background in many ways.
And I do remember the famous photograph of Nelson Mandela being released and Winnie Mandela with her fist up. That was definitely one of the first images that really resonated for me.
Really struck, right? But that's so many years later, right? So the body of work we're going to talk about just now is from, maybe about 30 years before that. The book was published in 1967. There's a little excerpt about it. The man who wrote the introduction to the book was a man, Joe Lelyveld, who was a journalist for the New York Times, posted to South Africa at that time, although he, in the mid-60s, actually was expelled. And he wrote an extended introduction to the book. And in that introduction, he describes the country as one of the least known countries in the world. Next slide, please. And so I wonder what is it, as we think about this work, that we think it can help us know about that moment in time. Next slide, please. So here we have, for instance, there are many images in the book, in this group of work that depict signage and the kind of very clear structure of where someone can and cannot go. So yeah, thinking about Cole's photographs, what do they help us know about this moment in time, do you think?
Well, by now I've done a lot of research and become extremely familiar with these images. And so I became really kind of infatuated with them. I was so kind of drawn to this style, frankly, and the kind of identities that people were projecting through their dress, the modernity. Like, even if you look at this image, is a very kind of urban-ish or suburban experience, and the hats, the jackets. But also in 1960 in the United States, you saw signs very similar, right? And one of the kind of strokes of marketing genius that the United States has is that it was able to look down on South Africa for its segregation, and at the same time impose just as brutal form of apartheid on its citizens while taking the higher ground.
Canada certainly has some similar history too, where some have claimed that, in fact, our residential school system is part of what's an inspiration, and some of the sort of segregation that happened through that was inspiration for apartheid itself. So we have some of those same contradictions, I suppose. Next slide, please. I am really struck as I look at these pictures about how much he manages to kind of pack into an image. Here we have very clearly an interaction between this young man and a police officer, both of whom are Black. We have a white man looking on. We have this notice, a kind of news notice, police swoop again, which was sort of, the swoops were
Is it me? Can't tell. You seem frozen.
sorry about that, a little glitch. Hey, Hank.
I just came back.
Me too.
See, we couldn't do that in person.
It's true, disappear and reappear. So I was describing a bit what I see in this picture, how kind of amazingly Cole kind of encapsulates so many interactions on the city street. You mentioned his style earlier. Is there anything you want to add about this picture in particular?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was just amazed by like the style that he of the people. You know, I think can we go back to that first quote and maybe read it out loud?
Sure.
I have not tried to read out loud. When I say that people can be fired or arrested or abused, whipped or banished for trifles, I'm not describing the exceptional case for the sake of being inflammatory. What I say is true, and most white South Africans would acknowledge it freely. They do not pretend these things are not happening. The essential cruelty of the situation is not that all Blacks are virtuous and all whites are villainous, but that the whites are conditioned not to see anything wrong in the injustices they impose on their Black neighbors. And I think you framing it, you pulling out that quote is really important, because even those living in the house of bondage were hyper aware of the incredible injustice that they were living with every day, and that there was a level of complicity and maybe brainwashing that had gone on to the general public of white South Africans who were unable to see blatant injustice as it was. And so, looking at the first image of the men going on the segregated trains, and then to the image of the young man walking in the streets and being stopped by the police, there is so much there. First, in order to fully read this image, we have to decriminalize young Black boys in our mind, and that we've been conditioned and lionize police. You know, we've been conditioned to believe that all police action is good, and that inherently a lot of young Black men from anywhere in the world are up to no good, and without ever questioning what situations created that scenario for them. And so in this image where Cole is using a telephoto lens, where he is almost photographing it from a safe distance, so to speak, and as you said, framing it with police swoop in again, and then and then we are watching the people watch this interaction between the young man, the police officer, is as relevant today as it is anywhere, at any point in 20th century, and probably then, because we see police interactions with young Black boys for questionable reasons, or for trifles, as Cole points out, really every day. And this context of police swooping in again is, again, you wonder how a young person living under such a regime of censorship could kind of go about the process of collecting images to tell the story that speak so much to the present moment. I should also say that my grandfather was a Black police officer in Philadelphia at around this time, and I always wonder what his experience was. I mean, I don't know, what it was. Of course, I know him as a wonderful, awesome man and provider, and a really loyal, committed citizen. And so there's also this question of how do we, empathize and relate to the Black police officer who has his hand on the shoulder of the boy and is looking him in the eye, and maybe trying to protect him because he also feels disempowered in this moment.
One of the things that comes through in particular, in the book has filled with photographs, but also a really extended text all the way through, which does an extraordinary job of documenting in great detail all the ways in which movements were circumscribed and all the systems put into place to circumscribe individuals' movements, to kind of an insane degree. Such as the sort of deep investment in disenfranchising the Black populations of the country. Go to the next slide, please.
Actually, I want to point out something else that just yesterday I was riding on a city bike in New York, and got stopped by the police because I fit the description of an Amazon thief. Mind you, I'm covered basically head to toe and wearing a mask. And a custom raincoat designed by my friend Jose Parla. And again, this idea that just by the nature of the color of my skin, which is barely even visible, I can fit the description, to the point that police have to ride alongside me and then have me open up my jacket and search me because of someone else's concern of a lost item, right? And we know that our lives are being put in peril because some people don't have a lot of the resources to even be able to attain those items, or actually that those items that may be small can be seen as valuable to them. So I always think when I look at these images, it's important to connect them to the present moment. And I'm a relatively privileged Black man in the 21st century in New York, right? And this image, for instance, of handcuffed Blacks could be anywhere in the United States and probably many parts of Canada today. That makes me think about the prophetic nature of a lot of the work of photographers, but especially concerned photographers.
I was raising the strictures because I was going to talk about how Cole himself, because so these young men were arrested because they didn't have the right paperwork on them. They didn't have the sort of required passbooks with the right stamps in them in order to be in a so-called white part of Johannesburg. the Cole himself, as you'll see through the pictures, had pretty extraordinary access to, he was moving about quite freely. He's photographed in hospitals and in trains and on city streets and in banks and in so many places. And he manages to do that because, in fact, he manages to get himself classified. People were classified in 4 categories: white, black, colored, or Indian. And if you were colored or Indian, you were granted, and white, of course, you were granted different levels of ability to move around. And he manages through kind of multiple process to get himself categorized as colored and not black, which allowed him to actually, it meant that the fact that he had camera equipment would be called into question, but when he presented his paperwork, he would sort of let him go. He realized that that was not going to last very long, and he did have to flee the country in 1966. But I was, I am, these are, I think, just basic facts that I find still extraordinary, kind of just make the work seem all the more extraordinary to me. So I was going to ask you, in fact, Hank, if based, this story being stopped just yesterday, if you've been stopped while you were working, but you were likely working when you were out in some form.
I was just dropping my daughter off and on my way to the studio.
Wow.
On a board meeting call with Crystal Bridges. So kind of, keeps you from getting on your high horse. And these images, we talked about these chameleon laws. One of the things that was also so astounding about South African apartheid was that there were these laws that allowed, you couldn't marry outside of your race, but if you provided enough evidence, you could change your race. And when in the 1970s, I know Arthur Ashe went to do exhibition games and was able to connect with a Black community. There was also a journalist, Les Payne, who is now deceased, who did an incredible book about apartheid and research for Newsday. But then I had the opportunity to talk to the late great art historian Dr. David Driscoll about his experience of going to apartheid South Africa in 1972 as an African American with the afro and the dashiki and being an advocate out of the Black arts movement. And he told this story about kind of going to South Africa and kind of being ready to for someone to call him a kefir or a nigger and be, to like assert, for lack of a better word, his, probably relatively newfound, but maybe he was born with it based off looking at him, American bravado. And so he said he went there and then he got off the plane and everyone was like so nice to him. He was there for 2 weeks or 3 weeks and he was like going to these fancy houses and, had pretty great access, was treated with a lot of dignity and respect. And he was at some dignitary's home and they were drinking wine. And after everyone got a little bit more comfortable, he was like, I have to say, I'm really surprised with the treatment that I'm receiving here. I expected to be treated very differently. And then the person said, oh, well, I guess you didn't look at your passport. It says you're honorary white.
Wow.
And this kind of the absurdity of that experience, that he was an honorary white, and one could tell likely by slightly changed elements of his clothes, but also where the way he walked and the confidence with which he probably walked certain places and who he was with, that he was clearly, one of the few exceptions to this broadly and violently enforced law. So the pass books, which is a piece that we have in our show at AGO, where people are burning their pass books, say a lot. And we many of us, if I wanted to come see you, would need a pass book. And that story is also embedded in this image.
Next slide, please. Thank you for that. That's what an amazing story about David Driscoll. I think we've skipped ahead a few. Do you go back one? Oh, no. Okay. Well, we're in the right order. Sorry, so further on the strictures, I mean, to me, this picture is all, if you go back to the, thank you. The teller's eyes, the way, you know, anyway, it's so full of suspicion, and again kind of brings you just this very clear, well, I will use the word snapshot, it's not a snapshot picture, but it just gives you this impression of relations just in this very very pared down way, sort of synecdochal way. Maybe next slide.
Well, I also want to say, like, what's so profound is him watching the bank teller watching him, and now watching us, watching him, and the audacity alone of a young Black person or colored person for that matter, to do something, to document something that everyone knows is wrong, and is trying to make right, is so profound, and I hope we have that courage when we see injustice.
Good. Yes. Next slide, please. Some of the, one of the sections of the book takes a look at, it's actually simply called Nightmare Rides, and looks at the train system that brings Black South Africans into city centers and then home again. And those trains were always very crowded. And so he documents a lot of those crowded conditions, including men who are just simply the only room they find is between train cars, which is kind of vastly, well, very dangerous move. Then the next slide, you can actually see how this picture appears in the book spread, just as one example. The book is very sort of, the way the images are presented is very kind of full, very strong, and you can see two other images here of.
Can we go back one slide just to look at the face of the man on the left? I want to see that. Okay, so you can see the difference in the printing on this one. There's more kind of dark texture in his skin. And then the one on the right, I think when they printed it for the book, you can tell it's lightened to a slight degree to really kind of highlight his whole face and his expression. How do you read that expression?
You know, it's I read it in a couple of ways. One, you know, his face is sort of there's movement somehow. It's kind of like the train isn't leaving the station yet, and if there's something about either he's waiting for a friend, like, is he seeing a friend coming that they're going to try and make room for? Is he kind of just trying to make sure he has the right grip on the rail to be able to hold? There's a sense of sort of in-betweenness, and not just because they're in between the cars, but in the expression that I find very, and there's sort of an openness too. And I don't know if he's seeing Cole make his picture. You know, there's that, as you pointed out the last time, the way the teller sees Cole, the expression in those eyes is vastly different than the expression on this man's face. So there is, I don't know, anticipation is the wrong word. It's the sense of, I don't know, kind of openness.
I saw anticipation too. You know, it's that captured moment when you're, yeah. And it makes me think of an incredible song that I hope people know, but that they maybe should download or listen to while we're talking, by Hugh Masekela, The Coal Train. Masekela. It's an incredible song. And at this time also, Dollar Brand, later Abdullah Ibrahim, and people like Miriam Makeba and Hugh Masekela were kind of creating a soundtrack of resistance. That there was a thriving culture of jazz and popular music that was in conversation with American music, much like the activism was as well, which is something that we don't really think a lot about. That there were parts of the United States looking like this, very much like this at this time, and that's where the connection. There's a unique relationship between the timeline and the forms of apartheid that happened in the United States and South Africa. It also, this image, or the image on the right, reminds me of the limited time I spent in Kibera, which is like the largest slum in the world in Kenya, and seeing people going to work at 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, thousands of people on these trains, and you're wondering if the train can't even move with so much weight on it. Not much less the fact that the train tracks are some of the only places, safe places, quote unquote, for children to be able to play and engage. And so may look vintage and far off, but I also believe that there's parts of this continent, especially in the southern part of this continent, where this reality is still existing.
So for you, they're not so much images of the past, they're reminders of where we continue to encourage, I suppose, the conditions like this as humans. The next slide, please. So I want to spend some time with this image in particular. It is, as you've seen so far, the image of the two handcuffed hands. His images are crisp. They're crisp. They're composed. They just kind of, you feel like they had a sound. They feel they do that. This image, of course, stands out in the book because it is the one that is blurred. It is a train accelerating with its load of clinging passengers, as the title indicates. And it's an image that, it makes me, it's not this blurriness is not a defining part of his work, I guess, what I'm trying to say. And yet it's one that is, the use of blurriness and blurring has become, I think, a strategy, even aesthetically, more of late. Many theorists, of course, have written about opacity, about fugitivity, about so many concepts of unfixedness as a mode of resistance, in fact. And I think, too, when I see this picture, I think of the work of Ming Smith, who is, in fact, hanging in the same gallery just around the corner from the wall that this picture is on. And her work is a little later, a little 70s, early 70s, late 60s, early 70s. And I often wonder whether she'd seen this picture and thinking about her own work and thinking about that aesthetic strategy. How do you
Ming was in Harlem at the same time that Ernest Cole was in Harlem, photographing. And so I wouldn't be surprised if she was in conversation with him and other photographers that were maybe slightly older than her. Ming is also one of the first photographers I got to know because her sister Tai Sing worked with my mother at the Schomburg. Since I was a baby, and her niece is my cousin now through marriage. So I had this huge privilege of growing up around all of these incredible photographers. And I asked my mother if she'd met Ernest Cole, and she said she'd seen him twice. I can't remember. She said the last time she saw them was on a street in New York, soon before he died. But I can't remember what she said about the other. Of course, I forget. I'm so good at preparing, but that I do recall my mother, talking about him and his influence. But yeah, and this idea of motion, he was really a thinking photographer, clearly, not just capturing. He had much larger plans for these photographs in the moment.
Yeah, no, many people who, I guess the details of his life, certainly after he leaves South Africa, are sort of sketchy in parts. He does spend time in New York, but those who, many who recounted some early having met him and learned about his photographs, including Lelleveld, who met him in South Africa, talked about how early on he was working on a book. Like he knew always he wanted to make a book. I was looking at other examples of it. I'll come back to that in a second. This picture, at least on my screen here, the face of this central figure, it looks quite blown out. You kind of can't see it, but in fact, in the print itself, you do see it there. And there is a sort of exhilaration of being on the move, even in the kind of really difficult circumstance. It has a playfulness about it that is not as evident in so many of the other pictures. But it is one that
I think it's also fascinating to consider that these images were taken before the most iconic figure of the apartheid movement was even arrested, Nelson Mandela. So to think that, you know, Ernest Cole, as a contemporary, for lack of a better word, but also I think much younger person than Nelson Mandela at the time, was also thinking about a book, and then that when Nelson Mandela was in South Africa, I mean, on Robben Island, writing his book, The Long Walk to Freedom. My brain is not. Stimela is the name of, thank you, Natasha, of the Hugh Masekela song. Yeah, that he spent these years smuggling pages out of Robben Island to write his book. But that these photographs in the story that Ernest Cole was making predated that, and I think that says something a lot about how about artists. We often of course, photography wasn't even fully seen as an art form by many people then, but that he had a vision, you know, and that when I talk about the prophetic nature, it's that he was working on something that would become so important, and now it seems like a footnote, ironically, but it's actually was, for many, the groundbreaking opus that I'm not going to say took down, but that made the largest cracks in this institution and the government that had done all it could to suppress and limit him and many other people. So the artist's voice should never be undermined or underestimated, I should say.
It's very true. Next slide, please. More signage. The book has another section in it that the title of which I find particularly striking. It's titled Education for Servitude, and about the practically non-existent education system that did exist. And really there were only certain kinds of work that different individuals were allowed to even do. You couldn't really aspire outside of this kind of structure that was already set up, predetermined. Next slide, please. And if you did get to go to school, often there was what was available to you was very limited. In a picture like this, I think is Cole at his best in so many ways. He manages to give you the sort of the mass experience. If I don't mean that in a sort of the generalized experience in such a kind of clear visual way. All these little boys sort of bent over their notebooks, kind of working hard, and that, I don't know, it's sort of the industriousness is what hits me first, and then I think about the section that it's included in, Education for Servitude, and it calls back. This image appears much later in the book than this next image. If we go to the next slide, and we can come back, but the book starts with the mines and miners and mining, and the sort of very difficult work conditions, and then only later do you come to this image of the book. But there's some kind of amazing things in both pictures that I think rather show a kind of strategy that he has of many people kind of in a similar position. So we see this here too, and it's just, again, that sort of very strong, sort of exceptional way of giving us so much, more than we knew we could actually, I don't know, see or understand about a place. We can keep moving from this picture and its relationship to your work, Hank, but I suspect you'll have some things to say too about the prior picture.
Yeah, I do. So if we could go back to it, just sharing information from my limited education about South African miseducation. There's at the Hector Peterson Museum, which is a museum for one of the young people who was killed on the major day of uprising. Actually, I believe it's June 3rd, 1976. So 3 months after I was born, where there were the students uprising, revolting against the education system, which was becoming more and more oppressive. And there was an attempt or the new laws were to have Black children learn only to read and write, I believe, in Afrikaans, and not English, so that and the danger of that and the intention of that was to have them incapable of communicating their thoughts outside of this very limited uh, language that was basically useless anywhere else in the world. And the fact that young people, not much older than these kids, so maybe these kids 16 years later, so yeah, not much younger than these kids. Um, Again, could not be underestimated. It could not be ignored. And Hector Peterson was one of the many boys who was killed, or many young people, I should say, who was killed in those protests. Um, but I also look at this image and I see them. Start to think, at first you look at them and you wonder, are they in prayer at first glance? And then are they sleeping? And then to see them studying so intently, um, I choose to try to colorize this picture in my mind and feel the breeze of the door that's coming in to the left. And Cole with his probably 35 millimeter camera on his Leica lens with his Leica camera or something like that. And um, wanting to not interrupt, but also wanting and loving them, loving these people and feeling that his bearing witness could contribute to their liberation, which is also what they were searching for in their writing. So that's just something that I take away when I look at this image.
Thank you. Let's move on to the minors. This is a picture. Do you remember when you first saw this picture, and why did it spark an artwork in your own work? You're going to move shortly to your own work.
I don't remember when I first saw this picture, but I do remember when I saw it. I think I first saw it actually online when I was going to do a show in South Africa in 2013. But I also saw it at the Apartheid Museum in Johannesburg, and it's much larger, and it was blown up into as part of installation. But I remembered, I think because my mother's an art historian, a photo historian, it has conditioned me to really be conscious of my looking when I'm looking. And I always felt guilty looking at this image because I couldn't help but to be gawking at their butts and comparing the lengths of their arms, the muscles in their backs. And none of that has to do with the experience that they were having, right? The inhumanity that they were living through, and the kind of absurdity that someone was able to even photograph this moment, but also the obscene normality of I getting a quote group medical examination. What even is that? Um, uh, and it feels like a euphemism in the context of that. And I'm going to stop there. But that song Stimela, which some people may be listening to now, was made for people like this whose lives were lost, if not in the mines themselves, but lost to the work, the labor that they were forced to do away from their families in these mines, pulling, and that's happening today. That's why we're even able to talk on these computers, because there are poor people, especially in parts of Africa not far from here, who are digging through the mud for little pieces of metal, coltan, and in this case probably diamonds and coal and gold, that are more valuable, and it's the smallest kind of particle than their entire lives, and that these people could not be trusted with this much of that, because to the rest of us, that this much of that is so much more important than allowing them to live free and self-directed lives. And so I look at this image and feel ashamed, um, because I know that a future generation will look at the stuff that we're allowing to happen and say, how could they? And I haven't figured out how to stop that, or haven't tried hard enough.
Well, I'd say that's a matter for debate. There's a lot that you're doing. Next slide, please, and we'll talk about how you transform this photograph. This is one view. This work has a few versions. It's called Raise Up from 2013. This is the view that we presented here at the AGO during the EMEA AGO Photography Prize in 2017. But perhaps if we go to the next slide, and then the one after.
Wait, let's go back. Don't.
Oh, okay.
Well, this was a major breakthrough for me, this exhibition, for a lot of reasons. It was a major breakthrough because it was the first time I was able to really exhibit this new technique of reflective prints that I hadn't done before, but also that I was able to exhibit some of my sculptures with that work, especially in an institution. And we prior to this installation, every time I had exhibited this sculpture, it was up against the wall. So even I had never really looked at the faces of the people, closely, I should say, when it was exhibited, because you had to always reach around and look as if you were looking at them in the photograph. And I was really thinking about Ernest Cole when I talked about feeling guilty looking at the images. If you go back, you can see that this image and this image and the sculpture have a lot in common, and it's because the sculpture is inspired by this photograph. And I was thinking about Roland Barthes' concept of the punctum, which is what he calls that which pierces you in the image, the thing that sticks with you when you look at a photograph. And for me, the punctum of this photograph was their shoulders and their arms. Like the man, there's almost like a salutation in the way that they're reaching there. And I wanted to try to represent this moment, represent these people with a sense of quote unquote dignity, if that's even in its futility. And I did that I don't know if it was smart, but by cropping off their shoulders. And so if you go back to this sculpture, thank you, that is, I called it Raise Up. I thought I would give it a different title and crop a little piece of it and make it three-dimensional, and it would give it a new meaning. And when I first exhibited, I should say, in February 2014, it was not responded to with that much it was like, that's cool, that's interesting. Yeah, that's how I thought about it. So that's cool, that's interesting. I really wanted to make one life size, but I didn't really get it. And that was in February 2014. In July 2014, a young man was coming home from a store in Ferguson, Missouri, by the name of Michael Brown, and was stopped by the police because he fit the description. And that interaction resulted in him being shot and killed in broad daylight by a police officer. And that injustice kind of had reached a level of boiling point, even though it was quotidian, it happened every day. After 6 years of having a Black president and the freedom that people thought would come with that one election not being so broadly experienced, was that I think the boiling point of uprising that really began with the murder of Trayvon Martin, but also Amadou Diallo and Oscar Grant. So the list goes on and on. But in Ferguson, Missouri, during the uprisings, people were screaming, "Hands up, don't shoot," as a call to action to the police and call to accountability for the police. And so when I first exhibited this sculpture in December 2014 in the US, people saw it as the "Hands up, don't shoot" sculpture. And it was dumbfounded that something that I'd made across the world with speaking about something that happened 50 years ago could seemingly speak so eloquently to something that was about to happen somewhere else. And that's why I continue to go back to this cosmic connection of like, we do not know what we're doing, but it means this meaning takes shape over time. And so if you do go to the next slide, you'll see that it wound up actually getting made as a life-size sculpture. And that sculpture, and you can see, and where you can see the front of it, and this is in 2018 at the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, which the Equal Justice Initiative initiated and brought into life through the work of Brian Stevenson, whose book and film Just Mercy show his experience and tell his story of working to find justice in this unjust system. And when he was imagining the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, which is also dedicated to the legacy of lynching, said to me very early on, I really would love to have that sculpture that you made, and that he was talking about the little one, in this memorial and site. And I think there's another image.
Yes.
You had that, like, so I don't know if we have the other side of this. I always forget about it, but from this angle, all these people are, in a sense, facing all of these kind of memorials to lynch bodies. And so you walk past it and you see them from behind. But I also was thinking about the legacy of baptism in the rivers in the African American community, and all in different places all over the world. And this way in which kind of this wading through the water and rising up out of the waters has a connection to awakening, a spiritual awakening, and a new life. And so there are a lot of different ways in which this piece can be read, and I really appreciate that. And in the backdrop is Montgomery, Alabama, steps away from the church where Martin Luther King preached and helped to initiate the Montgomery bus boycott, which was the gateway to ending apartheid in the United States.
We go to the next slide, please, as well. I wanted to include this actually because we see, of course, a group who are visiting the memorial who are interacting with your piece in this very direct way, projecting their own shadows, kind of mimicking, of course, the figures. Do you think it's an act of empathy that's happening here?
I will choose to say that. I don't know. I mean, I still, this stuff, it still doesn't make any sense to me. I'm still trying to understand how this is even happening. It's like, that doesn't seem like real life, that this sculpture exists and that millions of people have seen it, that it's up somewhere in the world right now. So, and that people are actually giving it, making these images like this. And I mean, it's pretty deep, if you ask me.
Totally. I love that you talked about this cosmic connection in this way, that you sort of pull a photograph, for instance, out of the millions, billions of photographs that have ever been made, and you memorialize it, I guess, or give it a three-dimensional form, and give it a new life, and in this context, at this particular place, time, and go to. We go to the next slide, please. Like going slightly back in time, back to this other work from a photograph by Eli Weinberg of individuals in South Africa burning their passbooks. A picture from 1952, so fairly early in the apartheid regime, and where I think an act of rebellion really like this was still possible. but the full kind of stranglehold of the systems that were enacted between 48 and 1990 have not quite totally come into effect. So you sort of see, well, the hands again are figuring here. And this picture, the original source image, which for some reason eluded my Google searches today, really is close cropped on the hands by Eli Weinberg, who was very much documenting the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. But when you want to talk about the movement or the hand, I mean, you were talking about the gesture and raise up and how it could be read in so many different ways. What drew you to these hands in particular?
I was thinking about collective resistance, that no piece of paper can or should be able to give or bring value to our lives. And sadly, they then, but we also now live in societies where a piece of paper can bring value to our lives and dictate who we are, where we belong, where we can go and where we cannot go. And the courage of becoming identityless from a state perspective by saying, even if only temporarily, I will not participate in a system that attempts to label me and confine me, is pretty profound. Can you imagine, many of us standing, dozens of us or even 10 of us, and burning our passports? And because we won't do that, we are upholding the system that keeps loved ones from one another, that keeps these imaginary lines up, these nation states which were built through as you've spoken about, genocide and deceit. That these Black South Africans were really using their collective power to push against the system. And to think about this being 1952, and so there being 38 more years of the harshest form of apartheid to suffer through, is really fascinating. And then wondering, could these people get to work after they burn their passbook? What you could go to jail, I think, for 5 years if you were caught without your papers. Some people might have paid serious sacrifices for that, and that's again, I think we narrowly avoided a reality like that in the United States just a few months ago, and the work is not over to ensure a safer future, and even to get to a place where we can all be free.
I'm going to, of course, so both this work and Raise Up were drawn from historical photographs, Eli Weinberg's and Ernest Cole's. You also use those historical photographs in two-dimensional works. We're going to show a couple of images, but I actually don't want to stop on those. We'll keep going, and I want to talk more about this idea of a monument and creating monuments. So if you would just move ahead, pause a couple of moments, move ahead, yeah, then we can pause here. So this is a relatively new commission of yours, very close to the Brooklyn Bridge. Tell us about, well, we've got hands again, we've got a gesture, we've got a three-dimensional work, very representational, but talk us through why it's important to have this in public space.
Well, I didn't realize until we just talked about it that the arms in Raise Up are reaching to the sky, and this is the arm of, I got to 3D scan the arm of Joel Embiid, who is Philadelphia 76er, and an immigrant, an African giant who kind of came here through in search of liberty in a certain way. And that I saw an image of a Harlem Globetrotter standing in front of the Statue of Liberty with a basketball spinning on his finger, and thought that there was something kind of really poetic about that. And then I realized that you don't need the ball, that just this gesture of the pointing up says so much, right? All over the world, it's translated in so many different things. It can mean unity. It can say look up. It can mean that we won. um, it can be a direction. But I wanted a work that really could like uh, could kind of be a place that kind of has, or you can be testing the weather. So this idea that a single gesture could be read in so many ways, something I was really excited about, but also um, that there's something about there being a 22-foot bronze arm at the foot of the Brooklyn Bridge in New York that felt really of an immigrant, that felt really kind of poetic.
Go to the next slide, please. This is a monument in progress that's going to be installed in Boston, maybe later this year, maybe the next, called The Embrace. And it won sort of open call for, not totally open, a call for proposals, and it was the winning submission. A lot of your works are of course, still making two-dimensional works that do hang in gallery spaces, but it does seem that more and more you're out in public space. And so why this kind of monument? How does it function differently in your mind than what we might typically think of as a monument in public space?
Well, this monument is inspired by this photograph of Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King when he was getting awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. And one question is, should any individual be awarded the Peace Prize? But also, what is the role of their partner in them achieving certain kind of accolades or in raising to certain kind of level of stature? And in this image on the left, you can see his weight, on her body and her gracefully upholding him. And you think about his assassination and the nearly 50 years of work that she did after he was killed to maintain his legacy and to uplift the spirits of a community, but also the country, and some might say the world, through embracing those who would push you away and beat you, through dignity, grace, and love. And so the piece I wanted to make was about kind of how the love of two and maybe many more can have a large footprint on society, but also in the world. And this monument, you will be able to walk inside of it, and it's amazing to think about how much the world has changed from when I proposed it, because a lot of us haven't had a chance to embrace a loved one in a long time. And the power of that embrace will mean so much more when this piece is finally completed. And maybe total strangers or even loved ones will be able to go somewhere and actually hug each other and begin to hopefully heal their hearts, but also heal the world through their coming together.
I like how it flies in the face of singular achievement, that in fact, achievement is never singular, that it is achieved through love, through those around us. Excellent. I will look forward to traveling to Boston to see it. Could I have the next slide, please? And we'll touch on this briefly. This is really a brand spanking new installation at the New Museum in New York, part of the Grief and Grievance show, which is Okwe and Wezor, Nigerian curators, the final show before he died, put together by a collective actually of curators alongside, sort of working from his ideas. Do you tell us briefly what each of the stars stands for here in these banners?
Yeah, so this piece, 14,719, is an installation of 28-foot banners of that many stars, which represent the amount of confirmed homicides by gun in the United States in 2018. And we have in my country, people killed by gun violence at an alarming rate that is comparative to, many foreign wars. There were 20,000 people shot and killed in the United States in 2020 during the pandemic. And we have memorials for victims of gun violence in foreign wars and or fallen soldiers, for all kinds of heroes and people we want to celebrate. But we have no way to even look at, to calculate, to imagine and face the tens of thousands of lives lost in the United States, because then there are another 22,000 people, I think, that year that were victim of homicide, of suicide deaths. I wanted, my cousin Sunga Willis was murdered on February 2nd, 2000 in Philadelphia. And since he died, almost 200,000 people have been shot and killed. And scarily, that's even only half the amount of people who died in the United States from the coronavirus in the past year. But it's still astounding. And it's also a much more avoidable pandemic that I hope that we can call attention to and to address.
And I mean, in many of the works we've looked at today, there's such a strong pull to remembrance, a pull to remember the past, give it new form for the present, to give it new relevance in the present, to remind us the lives that came before in so many different ways. I'm also struck by, in your work, by also at the same time, a very strong move to action. If we could have the last slide, please. We can
stop with this one, because I know we're over time.
Yes, although maybe the final slide is the new slide, perhaps. Last minute switch, maybe not.
Yeah, okay. It's okay.
We can talk about the Wide Awakes.
We'll come back to talk about Four Freedoms and the Wide Awakes,
yes,
which are collaborations that I have also been a part of. I think someone's doing something. Okay.
Yes.
I asked them to change the slide at 3:59, so it's definitely my fault.
Well, all right. Some news of the game.
Yeah, so I was introduced to this concept by James Carse, recently deceased theologian and game theorist, perhaps, who wrote a book in 1985 or 86 called Finite and Infinite Games, A Vision of Life as Play and Possibility. And he said that there are two kinds of games. There are finite games and there are infinite games. And he describes a finite game as a game that is played for the purpose of winning, which are most games that we play, whether it be the game we play in capitalism, the game we play in gender, the game we play in class or race or basketball or whatever, that these games are finite because they come to an end when someone's won. That's the purpose of it. And that the infinite game is are games that are played to stay in a state of play. Basically, that the whole object of an infinite game is to keep playing. And I think that connects to the indigenous and ancestral wisdom that allowed human beings to flourish on this planet for tens of thousands of years. And then the finite game of industrialism and scarcity has brought us near the planet nearly to its knees in just a matter of 200 years. And so my friends and I at Four Freedoms, a collaboration that I have, FOR Freedoms, decided that we wanted to play the infinite game in 2020 and that we needed to create the rules. So we came up with four rules for the Infinite game, which we encourage everyone to update and add to. But I was hoping that you and I can read these rules
Let's do it.
on our way out. You can read rule number 1.
Rule number 1. All right. No one plays alone. You know nothing you need to know. The rules always change, and love overrules.
Rule number 2, there are no gatekeepers. Bring people into play. Be where you are. Carry your own trash.
Rule number 3, learn from feeling and let love quiet fear. Nourish joy and go there.
Rule number 4, you're just in time. Leap before you look. You know everything you need to know. Together, we are awake. And seriously, don't take yourself too seriously. Play on play.
Nice.
And those are the rules. That's basically what I've been trying to do.
Well, I know that there are likely a lot of things that go along with this, and they take a certain form. I'm sure there are activities or events or things that you've planned, and so where can people go to find out what Four Freedoms is up to and how the game is going?
Sure, I don't know what's going on because I'm just a small part of these collectives, but Four Freedoms, FORfreedoms.org and wideawakes.com, I believe, or go to their Instagrams. Yeah, Instagrams, Wide Awakes and at Four Freedoms, and they're kind of spreading like wildfire. And the idea is that people take on these logos and these names and do what they wish with them and build this broader conversation.
Right. We have gone, well, there's always so much to talk about. We have gone a little bit over time.
Sorry about that. It was my fault.
No, that's not at all. Really exciting to listen to you think about Ernest Cole, think about how he, well, perhaps the ways he was playing an infinite game too, and how we can bring that work forward. So for those of you listening, I'm sorry we're not going to take any questions today, but please do, if there are any sort of burning ones in the chat that I can answer, I will do so after the fact, or we'll get in touch with Hank to see what he thinks. Thank you again, Hank, for your time, for your work, for your thoughtfulness. Well, I think, or what I appreciate as a historian of photography is how much you know that what came before matters to us today. And so thank you for looking at Ernest Cole's photographs with me today. And I hope those of you listening, those of you in Toronto, you can come and take a look at Cole's photographs in person at the AGO again very soon.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. See you again soon.
See you.